right. Well, hello again. It's
Hey,
been a while. How are you doing today, sir?
so you can hear me fine?
I can hear you fine. It's a lot better than it was last time.
Oh, that's good. So I have my puppy here.
All right, fantastic. That'll be a good comfort animal for you through this.
She insists on being held sometimes. And my wife is playing World of Warcraft.
Ah, very fancy. I'm not too much into MMOs, but all right. First things first. I want to say that I'm very impressed with the fact that you're even willing to try and debate this, because the anti-feminist is something I started probably 2 years ago, maybe a little over 2 years ago now. And it's something I've researched for years now, and I've spent just tons of time debating and talking about, and I find it almost condescending that you think you could convince me otherwise, but I'm nonetheless very eager to hear what your arguments are. So first off, I'd like you to state what you think feminism actually is.
It has a lot of different, polysemous definitions. I can read you a few and then provide.
I don't want you to read me definitions. I want you to tell me, for you, for this debate, and you're trying to get me to become a feminist, what for you would me becoming a feminist look like? So versus who I am now, which you don't know much about, so you couldn't make those assumptions.
You're right. Feminism, the definition that I would adhere to is just the belief that women should have the same rights and opportunities as men. And I know that there's a lot that is conflated into that. You can talk to 10 different people and get 10 different definitions of feminism. And I think lots of them are sort of disingenuous definitions of convenience. And I mean that on behalf, for feminists and people on the opposite side.
You broke up there for a second.
Okay, at what point?
Before you said the other side.
Some people use slightly different definitions of feminism. Oh,
okay. But I'd like to know what your so you said your definition is as simple as you think that men and women should be equal, essentially.
Well, I think that men and women are equal, but the important part of the definition is I think that they should be treated equally.
Okay. Well, the reason I'm not a feminist is because women, at least in the United States, I'm not going to argue for any other country during this debate but at least in the United States, have it significantly better than men in almost every single way that you could argue for, and that's an objective fact. And I've pulled up lots of research, so I'm happy to convince you of any arguments that you might have for, how women have it worse than men, because we live in a society that's genocentric and it focuses on women. And there's a reason that in 1910 or so, women only lived about a year longer than men, and now women live about 7 years longer than men, with men still dying from every preventable disease more often than women, besides breast cancer, but every single other preventable disease, and especially ones that are related to stress.
So let me state my position possibly with more clarity than it was.
I guess I should also state I'm an egalitarian. So in order to convince me to be a feminist, you'd have to be convincing me to give up what I feel is the best philosophy currently that we have for society. And I do not believe, before I go further, that I can be an egalitarian and a feminist. I do not believe that those two can be intertwined. I believe it would be like saying that you're, I just don't believe that those two can be conflated. So,
fair enough.
Sorry.
So, my position, with more clarity than the soundbite headline that QallOut allows, is that the anti-feminist, meaning you, should be a feminist because being a feminist is more logical than being an anti-feminist. even if most of the claims or complaints of feminism are untrue. I don't equate, by the way, feminism and humanism. Again, that's sort of disingenuous. But what do you define feminism as? Define it for me.
I think feminism is basically about superiority, and I think that from the very early inceptions of it, it was about upper class white women getting the ability to do something. It started really with the vote and the suffragettes. And
Right.
there's a lot of documentation of just how far they were willing to go to boost themselves up. They stepped on others. In fact, many of them said about black people that, you know, at least we're not black. Like, we're women, we're not black. We're not a third of a person. And they trampled on black people to get the vote. Other feminists in Great Britain, for instance, during the Great War, would give men a white feather if they refused to enlist, and basically to publicly shame them and say, if you're not going to go die for our country, then you need to be shamed publicly. As I said, our society is genocentric ever since the dawn of time, because women bear children, and if women don't bear children, then our society is extinguished. So men have protected women throughout history, more over than themselves, which they've sacrificed.
Okay, I see your point.
And yet we continue.
I am confused.
At least in all societies, women have had it the best. Yeah, I would say that women have been used, but I also say that men have been used. Men have been used to fight wars. Men have been used to do hard labor, while women stayed at home and worked with kids. I mean, you can argue that both sexes have been used and have been slaves in one sense or another.
I didn't say that.
Our society and feminists, well, let me finish. Our society and feminists tries and tells us that women, and this is the main reason I'm really against feminism, is that it tells us that women have it bad and it's because of men, because the source of feminism relies on the patriarchy, which we don't live under, so it's not even relevant in our society, which is one reason I don't think anybody should be a feminist. And if you are, it's basically detrimental, because you're living under this delusion that you live in a world that, at least in the country you're living in, you don't live in. So for people to kind of blame the patriarchy, blame men, blame white men, blame privilege, blame all of those things, instead of blaming their own choices, which we've learned that are the causes for a lot of the things that we would hear about as inequalities. Like I said, I just cannot, for the life of me, support any kind of movement that tells me that because I'm a man, I'm somehow at fault for the women's suffering. It's the same way that I don't believe that people who held slaves, just because a large amount of them were white, although many were black as well, and blacks sold people into slavery, I wouldn't say that just because some white people owned slaves that all white people were slave owners and all white people were racist. But with feminism, it essentially turns all women into victims and all men into perpetrators. So I won't allow myself to be part of an ideology that tells me that I'm the problem, when I know I'm not the problem.
Okay, I've sat in any number of women's studies programs, etc., and I have lots of friends, both male and female, who would identify themselves as feminist. And yes, I know this is anecdotal.
Very.
But a very small percentage of them would actually say that all men.
How many of these people have you ever challenged in any extent that would be considered, making you question something? Because that's the thing. If I talk to my friends that are men's rights activists, I'm never going to hear anything about how they think feminism is right. So I try and talk to as many people that disagree with me as possible. So I'm interested how often you challenge these people and don't just pat each other on the back. Because once you start challenging feminists, that's when they become vicious. That's when they become angry. And I think if you look at universities like the University of Toronto, or look at University of Mizzou, or look at Yale, I mean, these are prestigious universities. Or the fact that Anita Sarkeesian and that other chick went to the UN to speak about online harassment because they were lying about things and destroying the gaming community, and they felt like because they were being exposed, they were being harassed. And it's just bullshit. And yet women, if they call themselves a feminist, they can hide behind that label and say that anything that is negatively said about them or what they do is because they're a woman and because people who are doing it are sexist. And that is what, I mean, you can say the people that you know and stuff, but I'm saying that these are professors at universities. These are people speaking at the UN. This is not a small, weird minority. It's the same people that I meet that are like, I know Muslims who are very calm and passive people. Yeah, of course. I don't think that every Muslim is a bad person. And I don't think every Muslim is a terrorist. And I don't think every woman who's a feminist is a man-hating, bra-burning person. I think a lot of them are nice people with good intentions. But I think that just like I think that Islam is toxic, I think that feminism is toxic. So I think I could meet a nice feminist. I could meet a nice
Okay,
Muslim.
well, if you think you could meet a nice feminist or you think you could meet a nice Muslim, maybe you should use the word less monolithically. It's sort of like you've probably known Christians who were assholes or Buddhists who were assholes. But even if...
But the Buddhist philosophy and the Christian philosophy is a little worse. But yeah, I mean, there's differences. Let's not compare apples to oranges.
Well, I'm making an analogy here. You're being a little bit too inclusive. I know that there's a lot of militant nutbag feminists. Many, many, many. And probably too many. And I am so glad that I finished university before the extremists took over on a lot of campuses. But that's what they are. But
they're not extremists. They're not extremists. And I think I talked about Islam, and I think I make this comparison a lot because it's just so relevant, that suicide bombers, they are not necessarily bad people. They're not, like we say, they're evil and stuff, and how could they do this? But they believe what they're doing is good. And, you know, a lot of Muslims would argue that they're not real Muslims, that they're just extremists who are fringe and who aren't really part of what they believe. But the crazy part is that if you actually sit down and think about it, they're actually the most religious. They're actually the most accurate because they're taking scripture at its face value. They're not trying to interpret what they want. If it says, you know, you should trick non-believers and you should smite them and kill them.
That would be relevant if there was feminist scripture. There's not. There's not even.
But feminist ideology from
there isn't
Gloria
any
Steinem
one feminist ideology.
I'm saying, I know, and I'm saying that mainstream feminism, and I'm saying that mainstream feminism, including Gloria Steinem, who's like the poster child for feminism, those people are deceptive and they misinform and they are sexist in their own right. I mean, Gloria Steinem said that women who were voting for Bernie Sanders were only doing it because boys were. I mean, how much more sexist and demeaning can you get? And these feminists are also saying to women that if you don't agree and you're a woman, then you have internalized misogyny, or you're stupid, or you're inept, or you're brainwashed. I mean, there's nothing nice that's said about people who don't choose to take up this wonderful label. And as I've said before, it doesn't fight for men, and it treats men. So, you know, when you're telling me I should be a feminist, what's in it for me? Because as I said, I'm an egalitarian, so I don't just think women are equal. I think all people. I don't say black, I don't say Hispanic, I don't say Muslims, I don't say any of that. I just think that all people are equal and deserve equal societal status. Whereas feminists think that they deserve equality of outcome rather than equality of opportunity, because they have equality of opportunity, so they are equal, and in fact they make more money and etc. But they want equality of outcome. They want everything to be the same for them.
I still think you are conflating a lot of things here. You're painting everybody with too broad of a brush. I know.
I've talked about professors and mainstream figures. I'm not talking about
listened to what
protesters.
You said. I understand. But that's not all feminists. It's like Richard Dawkins isn't all atheists. Pat Robertson isn't all Christians. So spokespersons for feminism aren't spokespersons for everyone any more
But
than
when it starts to become dozens of them who are at major influential universities speaking at the UN, again, I'm making examples of people who are speaking in situations that they can make fast change. Emma Watson's another example. She's a moron.
You're breaking up.
Emma Watson has no clue what she, yet she's cute. She's able to get up and talk to people about making societal systemic change based on an ideology that is completely founded in ignorance.
You haven't done
so I'm again, I'd like to hear why you think I should be a feminist, because as I said, I'm an egalitarian. So I already think all people should be equal. And your definition of feminism, although it was a soundbite, you said that it was that, you know, women and men should be equal essentially. So I already agree with you. I'm asking, what am I missing as not being a feminist besides the hating men? Because you can say that, you know, not all feminists hate men, but if your entire ideology revolves around the idea that men are the source of your frustration, they're the source of your pain, they're the source of every bit of harassment you get, and it's just not true. For instance, a recent study came out and showed that over 50% of Twitter harassment that's misogynistic comes from other women. And like the word slut, for instance, girls do this slut walk, and you know who I hear calling women sluts? Other women. I don't hear men calling women sluts as often as I hear other women calling other women sluts.
Okay. I don't necessarily know if that's relevant, but okay.
It's relevant because because people are trying to say that men are the harassing, bigoted, and closed-minded group, where that's just not the evidence that's coming out.
Okay. In our English language, right, we have the pejoratives bimbo, cow, crone, dog, floozy, hag, harlot, harpy, hussy, nag, prude, shrew, spinster, tart, witch, slut, whore.
What do these have to do with me being a feminist?
Because they have nothing to do with you being a feminist. I'm arguing against. I'm trying to explain where you're wrong. Okay.
Wrong on what?
Well, if you be quiet long enough for me to explain, you would find out. What's your feeling about Black Lives Matter? This is not tangential; it's directly applicable.
Well, it's largely funded by George Soros. I think that should say a lot about it. That's not the question. Okay, well, I think I'm
not interested in what do you want to say? Impugning anybody's character. Just answer the question.
Okay, well, are you asking, do I believe if it's a good or bad movement? If I believe that they...
Correct. Do you think there's
I believe it's redeemable? No, I don't think it's... I think that the negative attributes of that specific group far outweigh any kind of benefits that they've ever even come close to proposing.
Okay, I will agree with you. Black Lives Matter, while okay in principle, has been hijacked by a lot of assholes. Okay?
It wasn't hijacked. It was created like this. That's the problem. It's the same way with feminism. People think that it's just turned into this horrible thing. It's always been bad.
There's always been bad elements to it.
But there are things that are better. That's my argument for not being a feminist, is why would I be a feminist if there's egalitarianism? If I lived in a society where egalitarianism hadn't been thought of, that would maybe make sense. But I live in a society that we know about egalitarianism. Feminism holds us back because it restricts us to it's men's fault that women are suffering, or, you know, men are suffering because women are whatever. Instead, it's just all people are equal. Isn't that better? Isn't that a step up? So yes, why would I be a feminist?
Because there's a... I don't know how to explain this as articulately as I would like. So I'm going to go back to the Black Lives Matters for analogy. For a very long time, blacks were treated like shit in the USA. Maybe they still are. That's arguable. I know that blacks kept blacks as slaves. Again, that's irrelevant. I'm talking about what whites did to blacks, not what blacks did to blacks. So,
but it's important that you put everybody into that spectrum instead of just zooming in on one race.
Yes, but most, for the last 200 years within the continental United States, and that's what we're referring to, the majority of wrongs, possibly up until about 50 years ago, were, the lynchings weren't done by other blacks. Maybe there were a few. There's no, we didn't have black men being tied to the white men being tied to the bumpers of cars because of their race and driven at high speed until their heads popped off, et cetera, et cetera. So blacks had an awful good reason to be angry. Whether they still have a reason to be angry is another question. So Black Lives Matter, whether it's ill-informed or well-informed, at least was has been a legitimate attempt. And I'm not saying on behalf of all of its founders, but certainly on behalf of many of its followers, to redress some of those wrongs. And maybe today, this is arguable, women have it better than men. I don't believe that, but I'll concede that it's a possibility.
I can prove it objectively if you're interested. I can prove it factually and objectively with statistics.
I would be interested in having that conversation. When I created this debate, I specified really that I just wanted to get to know the why of your position.
Because it's useless and outdated. It's an outdated ideology that does more harm than good. Simple as that. People cling on to it because it gives them a sense of community, and it makes them feel like a victim, which is a comforting thing to some people. And it's not empowering at all. It tells women that they're essentially stupid, mindless puppets that are controlled by men and the patriarchy, and that they don't get paid as much, even though they get paid more, and that they get raped more than they did, in the past or something, when that's just not true. Rape has decreased 80% in the last 30 years for women. For men, it hasn't really changed. And women, when they walk to their car at night, they have more to fear, even though men are much more likely to be attacked in general in any violent crime besides rape. When you include rape, men are still 96% of the victims of violent crime. So I just see a world where men are suffering, and in so many ways, objectively, significantly more than women. And I think that it's like you said about the Black Lives Matter thing and how racist and horrible it was for black people. It would be like at that time where black people have it that bad, and they were being lynched and they were being treated as predators just because they were black, just like men are being treated like rapists just because they have dicks. I think that it's essentially like if somebody said, you know what, that's the KKK. It's like, hey, we need a group that's going to watch out for our best interests. Even though there was some needed attention way more. I'm comparing feminism to that. I'm just trying to provide an analogy. I just think that it's completely insane to be a guy and realize how bad we have it and care at all about how good women have it.
I'm going to try to address a couple of the points you made. Sure, there are more men every year raped in the U.S. than there are women. And that's because 2.5 million actually 2.25 million men approximately are in prison in the United States. A lot of them for pretty fucked up reasons. So many of the people in prison aren't violent, pathological assholes. They're in there because they got caught toking a joint someplace.
I agree.
But the concentration of pathological assholes is still pretty high in prison. So it's not particularly surprising that men are poked in the ass. I mean, matter of fact, that's logical. Of course, there's going to be more violent crime when you have a bunch of violent people. And as far as...
But I thought you said they weren't violent. I thought you said they just got caught for poking a joint.
I said not all of them were violent. Probably most aren't. But it's sort of like if you have a bunch of chickens and one hen, it only takes one hen to impregnate a whole lot of chickens. It only takes one bully or one asshole to adversely affect the lives of a whole lot of prisoners. And
the main reason I think it happens is not that, though. I mean, as somebody who's spent time in jail myself for stupid shit like possession of pot, I noticed that they took care of, like, I mean, I was not in a prison, so there's a difference between prison and jail. I was in a jail, but I mean, if somebody got violent, they took care of it pretty quick. The problem is when you get into prison, the guards don't really give a shit about the inmates. And so the smaller, weaker people will be used. But saying that because it's men on men and men are more violent or something like that is like saying that because blacks kill each other more than whites kill black people, that black people, you know, who cares? Because it's just black people killing black people.
I didn't say who care. I care. I think it's bad
I didn't say that you did. I'm just saying that a lot of times that's exactly what's said about, you know, men's issues is that, hey, it's men doing this to other men, so who really cares?
I'm addressing percentages only. I'm saying it's not surprising that there's more men as a percentage who were raped in the United States because you have over 2 million men who've been thrown into a place where it's virtually inevitable that happens with the system the way that it currently is.
Did you know up until 2013? I'm sorry. Did you know up until 2013 that the FBI didn't even include men under the definition of a victim of rape? So men under the FBI could not be victims of rape until 2013.
I know, and that was pretty screwed. It shouldn't have been that way.
You know, and yet we never would hear about that. I heard about that by researching on my own. I've never seen a news article. I've never seen, but if that was women and men were covered and women weren't listed as victims, you'd never hear the end of it. And that's how our society is genocentric, that if there's a women's issue, you'll never hear the end of it. But if there's a men's issue, you won't hear about it.
And you're right. I can't dispute that. I'm disputing only the significance of more men raped than women. Yes, it's true, but not surprising that it's true given this situation. And as far as you mentioned women walking to their car at nighttime, well, I'm going to have to dispute that. Not that.
Okay, well, I have facts.
Well, I believe you. I believe you. And you can share them if you want. So you take a woman who is walking to her car at night, and you take a man who's walking to a car at night, and if you tell me that more men get mugged walking to their cars at night, I have no doubt that statistic is accurate. But out of those men who get mugged walking to the car at night, how many are forced to perform blowjobs or have stuff shoved up their ass? As a percentage, probably not very many when compared to...
How many robberies do you hear about that end up in rapes? I'm talking about walking to somebody's car.
You bringing that up? I'm addressing a point that you made.
Yeah, and the point is that men are twice as victimized by strangers than women are, and yet you constantly hear about how bad women have it when they're walking to their car or when they're being catcalled or something.
You
But
hear
men,
you hear about it with women more because what do you want
women
to say?
complain more.
The outcome. Okay, I've been mugged. It wasn't fun, right? I've been mugged, but I would almost infinitely prefer. I can't see you if you're still there.
I am.
I would almost infinitely prefer to be mugged. Okay, I'll tell you. I was mugged stepping out of a phone booth in the UK where somebody head-butted my face and then 3 guys pulled knives at me. It was a pretty scary situation.
Sounds like it.
Fortunately, the cops arrived at about that moment. But, which is more scary as a concept, getting mugged and raped or just getting mugged?
I can answer that because I've experienced both.
Okay, then what's the
and
answer
I can tell
for
you? I would much rather be raped than be... I was attacked pretty violently by 7 people who ended up having a machete, and I almost died. It was pretty horrible. If a guy hadn't been there to pull me out from essentially people surrounding me and kicking me and stuff, I probably would have died. I also was raped by a friend of mine, and that was pretty traumatic. It sucked, definitely, but fuck, I mean, if you had to make me pick, oh man, I'd rather be raped anytime. It wasn't fun. I didn't like it. It did fuck with me, and it still does sometimes. But Jesus, I mean, the fear, and I pissed myself because I was so scared when I was being kicked on the ground and they were screaming, "We're going to kill you." So I don't think, again, you can just assume that somebody's also going to be raped if they're going to be robbed, because it's not like, oh well, just because women have a vagina, they might be raped. As somebody who's experienced both,
I agree with you.
It's really frustrating to hear women compare their experiences of sexual assault or rape, as bad as they are, with people who have been... It's pathetic when our society cares more about women getting raped than it does about men getting murdered, because men get murdered significantly, I mean, just amplitudes more than women get raped, and yet when a man's shot on the street, you don't hear about it because our society considers the rape of a woman to be pretty much the worst thing ever. And that's, again, why rape has decreased 80% in the last 30 years against women. So women are safer than they've ever been in our society, and yet they're more miserable than they've ever been. There's a study called the paradox of declining female happiness, which I just named. You can Google it. And it goes on, even though women have been more freed and they've been more opportunities for working and staying at home if they want, or splitting it between the two, just being given more freedoms has essentially made them more miserable. And it's just a weird paradox of the more responsibility that they seem to be given, the less happy they are. And feminists are the epitome of people who don't want responsibility, but want everything that comes with it, all the privileges. So they want to be independent from men, but they want to have the state take care of them or the government take care of them.
I haven't heard of this particular paradox, but it reminds me of...
It's a fantastic study.
The what study?
The paradox of declining female happiness. It's a fantastic scientific study.
There's studies in previous years sort of talking about similar things, not with women in particular, but the more comfortable that you are in life, the pettier you become. Now we complain in the West that we have a hard time buying games for our PlayStation, which is a pretty trivial thing in comparison to problems that other people have. So
I think complacency is dangerous.
Yeah. So one of the things that I wanted to do during this is I understand why logically, intellectually, and now you've, being that you revealed that you were raped yourself and have been violently, physically assaulted yourself, um, that has to inform the beliefs and the opinions you have to an extent. So, and those things to me are relevant, or at least interesting. So I'm going to share, and then I would appreciate it if you do likewise, just for about 5 minutes, a few of the things that turn me into a feminist, right? The first, I was a precocious reader. So I've read the newspaper almost every day since I was like 8 years old. And let me backtrack and say that I'm 56, means I was born in 1960. So I was reading the daily paper in a small town in Washington State in about 1968. And in those years, maybe today as well, you could open the newspaper up, and on the inside of the front page was something they called the police blotter. And it was just all of the shit that had happened in that town over the previous 24 hours or sometimes several days.
I think they have those in every city.
Do they still have those?
Well, I have in my hometown.
Really? Oh, I'm glad,
Yeah.
sort of. I haven't actually picked up a physical newspaper since the internet, for the most part. So I wasn't sure whether they did or not. So I noticed one day that 10 out of 10 of the criminals with their mugshots in the police blotter were men. So I checked the next day, and they were men. And over the period of a month, they weren't all men. But let's just say, being charitable, that there were many times more men. If there was 3 women in a week, it was amazing. And that might not be true anymore. I have no idea. I haven't kept up with it.
I guess I'm curious as to what this would have anything to do with becoming a feminist.
Because it made me sort of feel dirty. It made me sort of think, God, why are men such assholes in comparison to women? And I understand that I was 8 years old, right? And if there were 3 women in a week who were arrested for anything, they were arrested for being the getaway driver that their boyfriend had slapped the shit out of them to drive that car. Okay. Then fast forward many years, and I spent a year working in the social welfare department of St. Vincent de Paul. Go for it.
Can I address that point real quick? Okay. First off, I'm trying to pull up the actual article here. Let's see here. I don't want to get my facts wrong, but women are convicted significantly less for the same crimes. Women are also arrested less for the same crimes. Shoot, I will have to find this article later. Shoot. So I can understand where you're coming from, where you go, oh, here it is, where you're saying that, oh, these people were being arrested and they were all men. Well, they've done studies that have shown that the least violent relationships between couples are between a 2 men. The most violent are 2 women, lesbian relationship. Those are the most violent. Out of all domestic violence, they're thinking that women are becoming more and more of, like, people who are reporting it, at least, women initiate 70% of non-reciprocal violence, and women are far less arrested for it. Where is it? Men are 165% more likely to be convicted than women. Men also get 63% longer sentences than women for the same crime, and court bias against men is 6 times bigger than racial bias. So, and men get arrested in 85% of all domestic violence cases. So that's probably why if a girl said my boyfriend hit me, then he probably got arrested. But it's estimated that women are the perpetrators in most domestic violence cases, and I'm going to provide links for this when I am able to. Women only get arrested in 15% of all domestic violence cases. Despite those numbers, 99.3% of all domestic violence charges are just for women. So while I do think that, okay, looking at the paper and seeing that a bunch of men are committing crimes, I think you'd have to understand why it is that societies get more violent, people do more things. I think it was actually Warren Farrell, who was a feminist for a long time before he realized it was becoming about man-hating and not equality, where he talked about the factors that create violent or more disruption in men, where there's scarce resources, where money is scarce, or where they're feeling like they're providing and not being able to have any time for themselves. But like, there's a lot of factors that come into all these things. And I think the problem with feminism and people just kind of jumping to these conclusions, just kind of thinking men are just violent. But they've done studies that have shown that men who actually stay at home and, take care of their kids for those formative years are much happier. They're much more social. They're much nicer. They report less depression. If we took care of our men and didn't make them have to work to exist, because that's how men feel in our society. They feel like if they're not working, if they're not making a paycheck, if they don't have some value to themselves that isn't even about themselves, it's about what they can provide. If they can't provide, then they're worthless, and our society will discard them.
Absolutely. So, I agree with everything that you
just but when you talk about something and make it sound so simple, I just want to say there's a lot of factors going on. And if we took care of men half as well as we took care of women, we wouldn't have those things. And we would have a lot more docile men in general.
I agree. I don't believe necessarily that men are innately more violent than women. I know that it's the result of acculturation and enculturation, socialization, let's say. I get it.
But it's not men doing it to other men, and that's what feminists will say. It is women who encourage men and teach them that they're heroes for fighting and dying for our country, and that women would be smarter than men if they were told the same thing. And that's why a lot of women have fought for the right to enter the infantry, but not the obligation. Women don't want to have the obligation to have to serve, but they want to be able to have the right to if they choose to. And that's something that men have never tried to fight for. Men have never really tried to get rid of the draft. But women have done everything they can to avoid the draft while giving themselves the right to serve if they want.
I spent 10 years in the United States Air Force. I spent a year sitting in a foxhole, most of it in the Middle East. I worked with men and women, and again, anecdotal, and from a pre-selected bias sample, I didn't know any women who weren't a little pissed off that they couldn't get involved in combat. I'm not quite sure. I mean, I remember you mentioned
Did you say that they weren't pissed off about it?
They were pissed off that they were not able to fight alongside us.
But did they understand that there was reasons for that beyond the fact that they had a vagina? I mean, that's part of it, because did you guys have a field day where you had to spend 10 days in the field camping and stuff? And I'm talking about training, because I didn't go overseas. I did basic and AIT, and that's it. But I also was with women while I was in basic and AIT. And holy shit, were the women way, way, way worse than the men, because the women were so petty. They treated each other like shit constantly. And the men, as much as we would fight with each other, the next day it'd be over. Like, we didn't let things like stay around. But there was a girl who was beaten so badly that they had to take her to the emergency room because she called another girl a bitch. And she was held down by 3 girls and beaten until she needed stitches. And her ACUs were soaked in blood, all because she called a girl a bitch. I
Yeah,
mean,
that's sort of extreme.
yeah,
um,
but that was common. That was very, our drill
but
sergeants told us that, yeah, that happens at least once around with the females.
I'm I'm trying to figure out though why you think that it's women who cause men to want to be heroes. Where do you get that conception?
Well, look at the way our society has treated people who have been successful in combat or who have been good football players, which is just an emulation of combat. We treat them as celebrities. So MMA boxers, they're the latest celebrity. Gladiator fighters throughout history,
Right.
the men who have risked their lives. The more men risk, the more glamorous, the more starry-eyed people get when they talk to them. And I think it's the fact that our society, well, not just our society, but society as a whole. Hold on one second.
Hey man, I'm taking off.
Okay.
I'll be back like at noon, maybe tomorrow.
All right. Yeah, I'm all right. Later. Sorry about that, my roommate.
No problem. Nobody can see your face anyway, so that's okay.
Really? I can see my face. I can't see your face though.
You're black. Really? See, you're black on my screen.
You've been black the whole time on my screen, just about.
You were. I could see you up until maybe 5 minutes ago.
Let me try refreshing the page. If I refresh the page, I hope it won't end.
You know, you can if you want, but it's the audio portion that's really the only thing of any relevance.
It doesn't matter if anybody can see me. So what was I saying about it? Where was I at? What are we talking about?
Men and being heroes.
Yeah,
and
I'm not saying that women are the reason that men necessarily think they're heroes. I think it has to do with a lot more than that. But I think that our society, from, like I said, MMA fighters to wrestlers to boxers to football players to baseball players, people who are athletic, people who are people desire different things, and I think that women overall desire a guy who's willing to risk a lot, because evolutionarily it would make sense for them to want that, because they'd want a guy who would protect them and keep them safe, and the more they know they're willing to risk, the safer they would feel. So I mean, like, for instance, if I was dating a girl and she was saying, what would you do if we went, if somebody was mugging us? Would you stand, like, get in front of me, or what would you do? And I told her I'd run. And she's like, oh, well, that's horrible, because you're not going to stand up for me. So one thing that Warren Farrell talks about in a really good book, if you really believe that feminism is at all useful, is called The Myth of Male Power. It's one of the best books I've ever read. It's by a guy who considered himself a feminist for a long time. He was the head of the National Association for Women for 3 years, something that no other man has ever done. And he wrote this chapter where he talks about the fact that we're basically bred to think that, these things are worth sacrificing for, and that we're a unpaid bodyguard, that we feel like, if I'm walking down the street and I hear a woman scream for help, I will run. I feel like I need to run and protect her. It's an instinctual thing that I think a lot of men have. And I think that it's just disgusting that we constantly treat it like, men don't care about women, and that I think the reason that men are more likely to be mugged is because that even people who are willing to mug somebody don't want to attack a woman. Even though they're weaker targets, I think even then there's a lot of men who still have that small part of their moral sense, because in prison, for instance, rapists do not have it well. The men who rape women or anything like that, they do not have it well in prison. So even murderers, even the worst of the worst, the people who took people's lives, those people hate rapists.
The only prisoners probably lower on the totem pole than a rapist would be a child rapist.
Exactly.
No, I understand, and I think that in ways that we're agreeing. And that's okay, because I don't know if you read my blurb on Quora or have read any of my other comments. I don't argue to win. I argue to learn. That's it. That's the reason that I debate.
Well, if that's all that comes out of this, that'd be great, because I do it the same way. I'm not trying to win you over, because I don't think most of the time when I have these debates, I will win my partner over. But at the same time, I mean, almost every position I've probably held has switched at some point, just because new information's come in and I've changed.
Same here. Same here. I argue, and if I come out of it having learned something new, whether or not I'm persuaded of my opponent's position, then I have won in a sense, in that I have benefited from the discourse. And that's the only reason that I argue. I don't care if I'm wrong or right. That's irrelevant. I have no vested interest in any position. I just throwing that out there.
So are you willing to, if you have no vested interest in any position after all of this conversation, are you willing to concede that egalitarianism is more inclusive rather than feminism?
I would already agree that egalitarianism is more inclusive than feminism. I still see a need for feminism, however.
What?
And
what use could feminism offer that egalitarianism doesn't?
Difficult to explain.
Because there is.
But I'll try. If we can eliminate in the public perception some of the, I don't want to use the word extreme again, but some of the more vehement, adamant spokespersons for feminism, if you don't have sort of a pro-con, just as in this debate, learning is hampered. If we're just two people who agree with each other, who sit down in a room, then it becomes this little self-congratulatory party. It becomes show and tell versus the learning experience.
I'm confused where you're going with this as to how feminism is useful beyond egalitarianism.
Because there's problems that are unique for women in the West and actually in the world. I'm
only arguing for the United States right now.
That's okay. Then that's all I'll argue. That's not to say that there aren't problems that are unique to men. There are. There are
you think we need
problems.
meninists? I'm serious. I mean, if you think that egalitarianism isn't inclusive enough for women, and it doesn't offer enough for them, they need more than egalitarianism offers, which is my whole point, that feminists care about superiority. That's the way I can tell when I talk to a feminist and say, okay, concede that egalitarianism should replace feminism. They can't do it because it's all about them. And they cannot, for the life of, and I'm not saying this is about you, I'm just saying that feminists I talk to, which you can watch the past 3 debates I've had hundreds of others, and they've all been generally the same. It's been about less than a half dozen, and you're included in that it's been civil. Because the moment you question people about this and say, you know, maybe you should give up your precious little stone that you're holding on to, your precious victim card, and say that maybe other people need it more than you do, because as I've said, men have it objectively worse in our society than in almost every single facet than women, and yet people will still try and hold on to feminism and not even try to think about ways that we can help men. So that's, I don't know.
Okay, the word meninist, all right? I smile a little bit at it, but maybe it has some objective utility.
I don't think it does. I don't
know whether it does or not, but
you're the one who's arguing that feminism is relevant, and that's why I said feminism.
For every overly loud and illogical, I'll say that, feminist, for every extreme feminist, there's sort of a corresponding, what do they call themselves nowadays on Reddit? You know, there's the red pill,
Oh yeah,
And
red pill, men going their own way.
yeah, you have these shrieking, hysterical men who, seem to me to be masturbating almost to the to their own
Seem to you to
misogyny.
be what?
What's that?
Seem to you to be what?
Masturbating to their own misogyny. I mean, they're so
I agree to an extent.
extreme.
I mean, I've read through the red pill, the subreddit. I've read through that for months just because I thought it was interesting to hear that perspective. I didn't agree with a lot of what they said, but I think the difference between like red pillars and men going their own way and just men rights activists in general is that they don't blame women for their problems, especially red pillars. They say it's our fault. We need to be alpha males. We need to stop being beta. So their whole thing is it's us, it's not them. So I mean, as much as they can, come off as misogynist, at least they say the problem is not them, it's us.
And I don't want to get off on too big of a tangent, but I'll just say that I think the whole alpha male thing is bullshit. I'm going to throw it out there. If that's something you want to debate later, that's fine.
I agree to an extent, but I love debating anything I can get my hands on.
So, in my opinion, we need two moderate sides, right? If you have to, I mean, it's like I get in lots of conversations regarding the continued legality of abortion, right?
Are you anti or pro?
I support the continued legality of abortion. I phrase it that way specifically because I'm not pro-abortion. I don't. So
you're morally against that, but you're pro-choice.
I'm not necessarily morally against it, but it's nothing that I endorse either, right?
That's another thing that blows my mind about feminists nowadays is the feverish, like, rubbing their hands and just kind of the eagerness to have an abortion. Like, I would think an abortion, if I was a woman, would be something I wouldn't really want to even think about, let alone I would make sure that I took birth control or used condoms or one of the many, many different methods they have to prevent that.
Well,
but
the only point that I was going to make there is that during these discussions, if I go into a discussion and my interlocutor immediately says, "You just like murdering babies," you know what I'm saying? I know that the discussion is fundamentally over at that point.
Yeah.
Because they're not a rational human being.
Well, I wouldn't say that, though.
They're using rhetoric. Rhetoric has no place in a conversation for me, at least in a debate. I'm not going to. You can express as much rhetoric as you want if you're enthusing about the superiority of the Force Awakens versus the Phantom Menace. Okay, please do. In fact, but if I'm having an irrational conversation, do it as we're doing it now. Actually, right? Don't use loaded verbiage.
I think people want to get the point across. I don't think that it necessarily negates their point just because they say you kill babies, because I mean that's technically what they're doing, especially if you're talking about late-term abortions. And now I'm pro-choice. I personally believe a woman should, have a right to choose, but in the same breath, as a guy who says, feminism is totally irrelevant because we need to focus on men for once. I've had a girl get an abortion without even telling me. I didn't know about it until afterwards. I think that's disgusting. I think that the fact that a woman can get abortion without me, the guy even knowing about it. Now, how would you enforce that is I don't even know how I get into that. I think that we live in a society where women can do that if they want to, without even having to, we don't live in a patriarchy where women have to ask men's permission or some stupid shit like that. They're essentially just able to go to things that are government funded. I paid for that abortion with my own taxes. That's the crazy thing. And I'm pro-choice, but I think that the government shouldn't be paying for it. But that we're not going to get onto the.
Very, very briefly, and then back to the other thing.
Yeah.
I am pro-choice insofar as I think that it should remain legal. I think that a woman should have the right to choose is actually a bad argument. It's if it is murder, right? Then it shouldn't be permissible, right? If it's murder, I can't murder my next door neighbor, anybody else. If it's legitimately murder, then it should be against the law. So the whole question to me hinges around two things: the personhood, and whether it's actually murder. And I'm not sure whether in the third trimester it is not indeed murder. It might be, but for the
I think if the child can survive outside of the womb, which they can in the last trimester, then I think it is.
I have friends who tell me that when it's still an ovum, when it's still a zygote in an embryo, that you couldn't see unless you looked at it under a microscope, that it's already. Yeah. I think that's just asinine. That's that's theology versus.
I totally agree, and I think that it's insane that people will try and argue that, because the way I used to argue it is that it's like if I stepped on a walnut, somebody wouldn't accuse me of chopping down a tree, even though that walnut has all the potential to become a tree, but it isn't one yet. But then there's the argument of where do you draw the line. So I think we should get back to the. I really want to hear the answer to why you think what possible reason that feminism could offer more. Because this isn't about other people. This isn't about women. This was about me originally. So I want to know, as an egalitarian, with all that we've talked about, what could feminism possibly offer me that I'm not already getting? Like, what advantages could it offer for me, or that I could help other people with, that I don't already have through my philosophical views?
Hey, your video's back on screen. That's weird.
Hey.
Your face just popped back up. I'm not quite sure why. Can you see me now?
Yeah, I've been able to see you for about 5 or 10 minutes.
Oh, well, weird. In actual fact, I don't think that it would serve you or serve us or the world for you to convert from anti-feminism to feminism. I'm going to concede that point.
That wasn't the question, though.
What was the question?
The question was, why would I? I mean, you're saying, I'm not saying that this is the topic, but it seemed like you were essentially saying that there was objective reasons why I should be a feminist rather than an anti-feminist. And I'm saying that I believe I have very well demonstrated how I believe feminism is not just a kind of passive movement that I disagree with, and rather that I think it's cancerous, and that's why I'm anti-feminism, and not just saying I don't call myself a feminist. I actively fight against its toxic ideology.
I believe that in the life of the average American woman going about her day, that a woman has to put up with more shit than a man does in an average day. Little examples from my own life.
I missed what you said after take more shit.
I was going to give you a couple of examples. In their day-to-day life.
I don't want anecdotal stuff, because, as I've said, the facts and the studies that I have are not anecdotal. They're not, because I have personal things that I could bring up about how I think, men have it worse than women, but I don't feel like I need to do that, because, again, I have the evidence on my side. So I'm happy to share the statistics about how bad men have it versus women, but I don't think anecdotal evidence is a way to appeal to me. If you want to convince me, if you were to show me something saying like, here's a study that shows that women are suffering from more violence than men, or women are being discriminated more in universities than men, or women are earning less degrees than men, or anything that kind of would make me say, you know what, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe men don't have it better in nearly every single facet. But from degree earning to how much people make, to the freedoms they have with their own body, to like courts for their kids, divorce settlements, alimony, suicide rates, disease, and how a lifespan. I mean, the list goes on. I can't think of a single thing women have worse than men. And so I guess I just don't understand. You know, you can provide examples of women, you know, who say, you know, I experienced this, but that just doesn't add up to facts.
Give me the credit at least for confessing that they're anecdotal evidence. Most people won't make that admission, in my experience. Okay. How do I say this?
So I'm asking for objective reasons. I mean, you're here to convince me, and I think I've made a very good case as to why I'm anti-feminism. I'd like to know at least one reason why I shouldn't.
You have made a good case. I confess that you've made a good case. I don't arrive at the same conclusion that you do, because I'm sort of apportioning blame differently, I guess. Slightly anecdotal, but not entirely. I only graduated from university in 2009, right? And pretty much, if you were doing bad in class, you had a penis. And you were more concerned with being cool and being tough, especially if you were young. And I had the advantage of going to university when I was already in my 40s, late 40s at that. But pretty much, if you were a smarmy douchebag, you had a cock.
Well, I mean, I don't know about the smarmy douchebag stuff, but guys not doing well in school, it's because the entire American educational system has been completely rewritten to teach women. Men and girls, boys and girls, whatever, have different learning styles, and classrooms have completely changed. I mean, they've always been more targeted towards women, but now it's just completely targeted towards women. So boys roughhousing and boys being boys, which when I was growing up, I mean, even though that was only the 90s, I felt like, you know, I could say dirty jokes. I could just be a guy and not be treated like I was a bad person, because I think just because guys are making dick jokes and talking about girls' asses, they're not bad people just because of that.
Well, they do make it uncomfortable for one half of the student body.
You don't think women make it uncomfortable for men by some of the things they do?
Oh, sure. Sure they do. As a teacher, you're supposed to be objective and not take sides. I am the teacher, by the way. That's my job. So I see firsthand what you're talking about. Yes, you have to approach the education of boys slightly differently than the education of girls. Again, that's a really huge topic. I could talk about that for at least an hour all by itself.
Yeah, again, I just want one objective reason that feminism is useful in a way that egalitarianism is not. In a way that, because, you know, when I talk about people dropping feminism, because that's what I encourage people to do, I don't encourage them to just rethink feminism. I encourage them to drop it. It's dead. It's useless. It's outdated. And it's harmful. And I instead recommend that they start reading more about egalitarianism or just practicing it, because it's very, very simple. I mean, it doesn't require you blaming anyone or hating anyone or creating enemies. And it certainly doesn't tell you that you're a victim. It tells you that you're a person that, you know, has these inalienable rights, and that you should have social and economic equality with people. And it doesn't tell you that you're going to have equality of outcome. It tells you you're going to have equality of opportunity. So what is a reason objectively that I would say, okay, feminism, you know, it has this over egalitarianism?
You wouldn't. It doesn't have anything intrinsically superior to egalitarianism. You're right.
So that's my point. It's just.
But that doesn't mean that I don't think that feminism isn't worthwhile in itself. I mean,
Wow.
you know.
At this point, why? At this point, our society, women have it more than equal than men. So why would you want a movement that says women need to be equal when women not only are equal in every single way, they have it better? Why do we need something that tells women that they need to be equal when they already have it better than we do?
I don't. You've given me all of these statistics. I haven't disputed any of them. It would be dishonest for me to do so. But you haven't persuaded me. So you wake up in the morning. This is why I'm using things that are anecdotal.
Okay.
You wake up in the morning, you go about your day. I can't speak for anybody else, but you can speak for yourself and I can speak for myself. I'm an average dude. I define average, in fact. So in your day, and your average day, or the average day of the average man, any of your acquaintances, friends, people in the news, etc., in what way are you victimized, if you would want to use that word, in which a woman isn't?
Do you mean in just an everyday, or can I think of a recent example that really stands out?
Both.
Okay. Every day, I would say that I'm perceived as a threat by women. I'm perceived as, if I'm walking down the street, I'm a very tall person. I'm over 6 foot. I'm a decently big guy, and I have a pretty deep voice, and I can be treated like a threat to women simply because I'm a guy, simply because I'm tall, maybe. That is something I don't think women ever have to worry about, being perceived as a threat, or walking down the street behind somebody and watching them protect themselves in a way that only a racist Southerner would protect their purse when they see a black person on the other side of the street. Women react that way around men all the time, even though the facts just don't show that men do anything but try. As so
can I say something about that?
That on an every note, if you want it for it. Hello?
I can you hear me still?
Yeah.
Okay. Can I interject? Asking your
Sure.
permission to interject.
Yeah, sure.
That's true in the U.S. It is, and it's true in a lot of places in the world. I'm in South Korea right now, and one of the reasons that I live here, or that I enjoy living here, I've been here 7 years, is because it's not true here. When I walk down to the main, where all the convenience stores and fast food restaurants are, right? There's very little illumination. It's pretty dark. If I'm walking behind a woman here, whether she's 15 or 85, she doesn't glance over her shoulder. She doesn't clutch her bag tightly to herself.
They don't have feminist propaganda. If they had feminist propaganda on CNN and Fox News and MSNBC and NPR every fucking day, I'm sure they'd start clutching them purses and bags.
There's misogyny and feminism in Korea, but it's in a different guise, and in ways it's much worse. Here I can be on an elevator, and there'll be a 7-year-old kid on the elevator. There's only 2 of us in the elevator, and they'll turn to me and say, "Hello," talk to a kid alone in an elevator in the United States, and you're an offender, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not quite sure. Well, maybe I am. If you look at the United States, I know that now we have much less violence in the big cities than we used to. I mean, I think New York actually has about a third of the violent crime that it did in the 70s. And I apologize if I'm incorrect in that.
Nationwide, I believe it's been going down.
But when I was growing up, I would have been scared shitless to walk downtown, to walk any place in New York at nighttime. And I'm a guy, and you were raised in the U.S. feeling more vulnerable. It's just the way that you're socialized.
True. That's not true. My parents actually had to worry about me because when we were at the mall, I used to try and walk off with other families and pretend like I was part of their family. Like I just thought that was cool to do. They told me a time about a carpet cleaner coming to my house, and I walked out butt naked, like I was like 2 or 3, holding a briefcase, and said, "Nice to meet you." And I shook their hand. Like,
I don't understand how that counters. I mean, I asserted that females are raised in the United States to feel more vulnerable.
Oh, you're saying females are?
Yes.
Not just everyone. Oh, I thought you were saying everyone in the United States is being raised that way.
No, females are raised to feel more vulnerable. And
yeah, and it's because of feminist ideology. It's feminism that tells women that they're weak and that men want to take advantage of them, and that's all essentially men want. That's feminism. Feminism is not empowering to women. It essentially tells them that they're just mindless fuck dolls, that the only thing they're good for is being manipulated, and that the only way they can break these chains is to acknowledge the pure hatred people have for them just because of their gender, or how men just want to prey on them and abduct them and abuse them. And it's just, I agree. I mean, I think it's the way that we raise our kids, but I think it's very importantly the way that feminist culture has gotten into our society, because if you look back at the 1950s, kids did not think that way, and that so yeah, I mean, if you look at an earlier time in America, and I'm not saying that everything was great, there was more racism back then, but I am saying that kids did not, I mean, they played out in the street until the lights turned on, and that was boys and girls. Yeah, I mean, that was boys and girls. They got dirty together. There wasn't TV as much and like games and stuff, so that they just went outside and played together. And now we live in a society where things haven't changed that much. In fact, they've only gotten better as far as violence and rape and stuff for the most part. And women have been given more freedoms, and yet women are less happy. They report being less happy. Again, that's the paradox of declining female happiness, which is just the name of the article, the study. And they're demanding more. They've never been more free. They've never had more opportunities and been more successful, and yet they're less happy than they've ever been, and they feel more afraid. I mean, there was that huge women's march. That to me was just mind-blowing, that these women are out there in those amount of numbers. See, that's when you say this is fringe people. Those people honestly believe that they're being oppressed, and they're delusional to think that. And it's unfortunate, because I feel bad for them, because they're like people who were raised to be racist, and their parents told them, if you ever meet a black person, they're secretly going to want to rob you. Like, they're secretly going to want to take advantage of you. And that kid grows up thinking his whole life that if he meets a black person, they're going to take advantage of him. I've met people who are raised like that, and they tell me that, that kind of ingrown fear of what they don't really know and other people turns them into a hateful person. And I think feminist ideology is no different than racism, because it's essentially sexism, saying that it's misandry.
I think that you and I define feminism ultimately. I think maybe your definition or understanding of feminism is a bit more expansive than mine is, so that you attribute certain unpleasantries or certain realities to feminism that I don't. We've put women on a pedestal for a long time, probably since Edwardian and Victorian times, but I don't think that it had anything to do with feminism.
No, it was women. It was women empowering themselves and making decisions to do things. It wasn't a bunch of people holding signs saying free us, stop oppressing us. It was a woman saying, I'm going to go to school for science. I'm going to learn about math. You know, I'm going to pick up a book and I'm going to study this thing that I want to learn. And now we're, you know, with feminism, they're trying, like, okay, you were asking me, you know, in what ways do I face discrimination in a way a woman wouldn't? I went to a coding school in Denver a few months ago, and I was really excited. I called them ahead of time and I told them that I was really interested and I couldn't wait to go. You had to apply to attend this weekend course where you could learn more about the school and kind of meet the staff. And I asked them some questions, and at some point they told me they had a safe space policy, and I got a little concerned. I was like, well, safe space policies to me are just censorship zones. They're essentially places that people's comfort outweighs people's freedom of speech. And I don't agree with hate speech, but I think that when people can't make jokes or something, that's too much, because offense is taken, not given. And eventually I told them that I was, you know, I did YouTube videos and that my username was the anti-feminist, and they just didn't seem to say much about that. So they invited me to the school. I went to the school. I had a good weekend. I didn't say anything about politics, anything about feminism, because I was just there for school. I didn't want to talk about that stuff because I usually don't talk about it in public because it's so divisive. I don't want to make enemies out in public. So on the last day, you have to do an interview, and they told me that I've made it to the final step. I didn't even have to apply to this university. I just had to interview, and if I passed the interview, I was good. So I get to the school, and I missed the initial one because I was sick that morning. And when I got there, I said, you know, can you help me find this person to interview with? And she said, yeah, came downstairs, and then went, and then came back out and took me upstairs. And she's like, well, I don't remember how the conversation really like exactly started, but she initially asked me something like, so are you the anti-feminist? And I said, what does that have to do with anything? She said, are you the anti-feminist? I don't think that's relevant, and I don't like talking about this kind of stuff. And she just kept pressing me. So I said, yeah, that's my YouTube handle. And I don't think that that's relevant right now because I'm talking to you about going to your school, and I've never mentioned this stuff to you or to any other staff. And she said, well, you said somebody on the phone, you know. And I said, that was weeks ago. You folks should have told me if you thought that was an issue. And she said, well, you're just a very offensive, like your username is so offensive that we don't think that you would fit in with our student code of conduct. So we don't think that we can go on with this interview. And I had paid about over $1,000 to fly there, stay in a hotel, attend this thing I had to pay for, and I was being denied because of my YouTube username. And I asked, have you ever even watched any of my videos? Have you ever heard me talk? And she said, no. And she said, but me and the other staff members have been talking about you all weekend, and we just don't think that we can tolerate your offensive ideas and who you are basically as a person. And I was just gobsmacked. I mean, I always heard about discrimination against men just for having ideas that differ from the norm, like on this. And this is something I keep to myself. I understand if I went in there and I was like, oh, is this all about women, blah, blah, blah. But I didn't. I went in there, I didn't talk about politics, didn't talk about religion or feminism or anything. And yet my username, because I said it to somebody on the phone weeks before I went to this event, was enough to get them to say, we don't think you're going to work. And so that's something I don't think a woman would ever have to face. I mean, unless she had the same viewpoint as me, but even if she did, there's more opportunities, there's more scholarships for women. Like when I was in the class, they were a very SJW university. And they said, you know, we have all these scholarships if you're a woman, and if you're a woman of color, we have tons of scholarships and grants and all these other things that we can give you. And I said, is there anything for men? And they just laughed at me. They just laughed and said, you know, essentially how, they didn't say that, but they just laughed. And it's frustrating, feeling like you don't have as many opportunities because you're a guy. Simply because you were born with the wrong genitalia, I can't, even though I'm more interested in computer coding than most women I know, I can't go because they want more women. And the way that the woman at the school phrased it to me was, she said, I eventually want to see a world in which 50% of coders are women and 50% are men. And I said, you're delusional. That's not going to happen. Because do you want to see a world in which 50% of garbage men are women? Do you want to see a world where 50% of sewage treatment plant workers are women? Like, the only time you ever hear about, you know, people wanting women to dominate is when it's a well-paying field or a comfortable field. It's never usually the extremely hard ones, like neurosurgery. I never hear them saying, 50% of women should be neurosurgeons, or the really dangerous ones, or the really stinky ones, like garbage men or sewage treatment workers or construction workers. So feminists constantly will puppet these things that they want equality, but when it comes down to it, they don't. They want equality of outcome, which is not equality. And so that was something that I faced personally that cost me, close to $2,000, a lot of my time. I felt pretty shitty. My own family wasn't supportive. Like my dad, I think, actually said that what I do is hate speech. So, I mean, my own parents weren't happy about it. They were just like, oh, well, maybe you should just delete your channel. Maybe you should stop calling yourself that. But part of the reason I'm so adamant about what I do is because I believe I'm right. I don't do this because I think that I'm angry and I think that women are awful and whatever. I do this because I think that men need to have attention brought to them, and the only way that we can do that is by exposing feminism, which is currently leading the conversation. As we continue to praise it and say that it has some use in our society when men are suffering. And, me and you as guys are having this conversation, and one of us is trying to say that, hey, we need to look out for women. When we should be both saying to each other that what we need to focus on entirely is men. I mean, women have had their turn, and I don't think that we should take away from it. And I just think that men need to have their turn. And so, yeah, that's my story from Colorado.
I understand where you're coming from there. Speaking for myself, I get up in the morning, do my thing, whatever that thing happens to be for that day. I have only benefited my entire life by being male.
How would you even know, though?
How would I know? Okay, I worked for 10 years at a computer store. I assembled PCs, configured PCs and networks, and was an internet service technician.
And you couldn't have done that if you were a woman for some reason?
I could have done, but
okay.
the assumption every time when they would call up, they wanted the dude. They wanted me. Not that there weren't other women who
weren't. You good at your job, though? Were you?
I was.
Would you say that you were better than them, maybe?
I was okay. I was maybe a little bit of fat-headedness here. I'm pretty good, right?
Maybe that's why they picked you. I don't think it was because you had a dick. I don't think somebody thought to themselves, this guy's got a penis. He knows what he's doing.
Well, not consciously anyway, no. But many, many, many times people would walk into the place of business because we had a storefront, and my boss, who was a woman, who was a far better programmer than I am,
and that's why she was your boss,
right? But
exactly.
What I'm saying is, people would walk into the store and not want to talk to her because she had tits.
But you think, did they say that, or did you assume that?
Well, no. I would say no. That's a question that you really need to ask Monica. That's her name, all right? And they would say, no, I want to talk to you. And now I'm going to be fair.
Maybe they like talking to you. You got to stop bringing gender into this, man. Unless they mention gender, you are only assuming that they cared about that.
Well,
I understand the assumption, but at the same time, unless one of them said, I don't want to talk to that woman, or I don't want to talk to some bitch, that would be an example. But if all they said was, I prefer to speak to you, there was times when I did customer service for Apple as a tier 2 for a year, and almost all my supervisors were women. And there was a lot of times where the customer would have to talk to my supervisor for some reason if they complained. And actually, that was when I was tier 1. But they would prefer talking to me too. And I think it was just because I was good at my job. I enjoyed talking to them. I don't think it was because my supervisors were female. because some of them, were really good with customers too. But I wouldn't make, I guess my assumption would not be if somebody said, I would prefer to speak to you than your supervisor. My first assumption, because I don't think like that, is not, oh, well, it must be because I'm a guy. And I would have women do that a lot too. I would have women prefer to speak to me over another woman.
I had women prefer to speak to me too. Yes, I'm making the assumption that the existence of my penis somehow made them prefer, subconsciously, probably, not necessarily in all cases. Are you walking around?
Huh? Yeah.
Are you okay? I can't really tell. Are you a pacer?
Oh, I'm moving tomorrow. I'm driving across the country, and so I'm just really anxious because I have never driven across the country, let alone hauling a 5x8 trailer. So,
well, good luck. Be safe.
Yeah, thanks. I hope I don't die.
We're probably finished.
Oh yeah, I'm fine. This was a good talk, so I'm good with where we've reached. I don't think we're gonna get any more of any further than we've gotten. So yeah, I'm more than happy to have another debate with you, and I really appreciate you being as civil as possible and not just throwing logical fallacies at me, because almost all of these debates that I've had, at least on QallOut, have been people basically just calling me a sexist and stuff. So I appreciate you at least talking to me.
That's what I do it for, just to learn different viewpoints. I do think that maybe your username could be a little bit less in your face, but it's too late.
It's too late now.
Yeah.
It's too late now. I gotta hone it.
I'm an atheist, right? I don't know whether you are or not, but I'm an atheist, and I'm constantly annoyed by people, and it's been a couple of years, who would describe themselves as brights. They were usually atheists.
Oh God, I know.
Talk about an obnoxious dickhead adjective to apply to yourself.
Yeah. If I meet feminists in real life, I don't even tell them. I usually say that I'm against feminism, but I don't call myself an anti-feminist when I just have conversations.
Okay,
it's just my username.
Fair.
So it's I'd understand if I walked around going, I'm the anti-feminist. That'd be pretty obnoxious, like the Amazing Atheist or something. But
right. I was just gonna mention the Amazing Atheist. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Agreed. Okay. So we agree on a lot of things. Still disagree on a couple of things.
I'm still waiting for one objective reason why feminism is useful. Actually, I think you did concede. No, you did concede that there is no. Okay, well that's I'm happy with that. So that works for me.
The only thing that I would like that they would change with this program, actually there's many things, is people who vote 4 seconds after the conversation has begun. So I'm watching the votes here, and there should be a 5 minute or something like that. At least a 5 minute, yeah.
I agree, but at the same time, I mean, this has been something they've been using for a while. So I mean, I'm sure they send an email to Yaz. I'll do the same thing. I mean,
no problem. It's a minor thing.
Well, thanks again for debating me.
No, thank you.
I think we made a lot of good points here on both sides.
I agree. Well, thank you kindly.
And have a great night.
You too. Bye-bye.